anywhere you have a penetration, whether it's a pipe or a wire or a window or a door, anytime you're poking into that facade, like you have to be really careful about keeping water out. The other thing is, if water does get in, you have to give it a way to escape. And that's where we get into the vapor open wall assemblies and why we only work with vapor open wall assemblies. You know, the more you learn, the more you realize that you don't know, but you're also so excited to learn more. I think there's like the Dunning-Kruger effect where you start to know things and you think you know a lot, and then the more you learn, the more you realize you don't know, and you kind of like come back down into this like, oh no, I don't know anything. Like your mind starts getting blown, and then you start, you kind of keep that perspective and just continue to grow from there and start to learn more and try to be a little bit more humble about what you don't know.
Hey guys, welcome back to the Awakening Spaces podcast. In today's episode, I'm going to be chatting with Frank Wetenkamp, one of the owners of Living Craft. And Living Craft is a healthy, high-performance builder who serves the Front Range of Colorado. And in this episode, we're going to dive into everything from the benefits of using natural materials to how to vet a good contractor and some of the challenges that you might face if you're trying to introduce natural materials on your new build or renovation project. Frank and his team at Living Craft are doing some really, really amazing work here in Colorado. So I'm really excited for you guys to listen to this episode. So let's dive in. Hey, Frank, welcome to the podcast.
Hey, Ashley, thanks for having me.
I'm really excited to chat with you today. So Living Craft, your company, is my dream builder here in Colorado. I can't wait to work on a renovation project or build a home. You guys will definitely be who I want to work with. And so I would love for you to share a little bit about who you are, how you started your company, and just how you came to do what you're doing.
Yeah, well, thank you for having me. And the work you're doing is really important. There's not enough people talking about these issues in the building industry, so super important. So thank you. But yeah, I mean, for us, I grew up doing construction. So that was like every summer during middle school and high school, I was working for, local carpenter, and he did everything, which was really great. We built cabinets, we built a accessory dwelling unit, we went to some lady's house and just planed down her wood door when it was sticking. We got to do all the things, and that really exposed me to a lot. It also exposed me to like the toxicity of things, even just like innately when you're just like, gosh, this hurts my nose when I breathe this in. And so, my journey was one of just, I always was drawn to nature, and I just wanted to find the best way to do things all the time. And so, when I went to college, I tried to do a minor in sustainability. And even then, like, that was kind of a new term back then. And so even within sustainability, it was kind of like, we're just like scratching the surface of these things. And so once I kind of quit my engineering job, I took a natural building course up in Vermont at Yes Tomorrow. And that really exposed me to more of like the natural materials part of it. One thing I really appreciated about the people who put on that course was that they also came to this from like a conventional construction background. And so it was kind of blending like, how do we introduce healthier natural materials into more of a conventional construction atmosphere? And so from then I knew where my mission was and what I was driven to do. And so that just kind of like led me to meet my business partners out here in Colorado. And at the beginning, it was very like shoestring. We didn't really have a vision other than like, let's do natural building. So anything natural building, like we want to be part of it. And so, we didn't make a lot of money in the beginning, but that wasn't really like the point. It was just, I want to get exposed to as many things as I can. I want to do anything that has to do with straw bale or cob or adobe or light straw clay, all the things, right? Now we were pretty naive and we weren't very good business people at the beginning, and there were four of us. Um, so the journey was a long one. We've been a business for about 9 years now. Um, and each project was kind of a build upon the last one. So we have lots of construction experience, but each project we took on was like slightly outside our comfort zone over and over again. And we did a lot of learning. And along that way, we lost a couple of business partners. One actually died of cancer early on. It was really sad. Still miss him, obviously. And then another business partner just kind of got burnt out and left a few years ago. So right now it's me and Cheryl. And so, you know, our mission now is just to kind of keep building on what we have built already, um, and just try to find like what is the best way to do this in a way that's good for, the people, the planet, and by the people side of things, it's kind of like there's a lot of people involved, both in the factory, the people downwind or downriver from the factory, and most importantly, the people who occupy the building because buildings are for people. So that's kind of like, I don't know, a quick journey into my story, but that's just kind of where we're at now. And mostly now we do mostly new builds, but also some remodels. Just kind of depends on the project and the client.
Yeah. Yeah, I love that you guys are just people first, because it is so, so important. And I understand that, you know, obviously sustainability is a big part of the mission, and obviously what we're breathing in. And I would love for you to share. I think early on when I reached out to you, this was years ago now, maybe like, I don't know, 5 years ago, when I reached out originally and I had asked if you worked with anyone with chemical sensitivities. And you have worked on some projects with people with sensitivities. Am I right?
Yeah, we worked on a couple projects specifically with people with multiple chemical sensitivities. And, the biggest thing that we learned was that it's very personal. So there's not like a one size fits all. It's not like, oh, I'm going to do this for every person with multiple chemical sensitivities, because like what works for one person may not work for another person. Um, and even within that, I it's that's not never anything that I've really experienced myself. I've definitely developed certain allergies and like sensitivities to certain things. Like my skin is super sensitive to like rock wool or fiberglass or anything like that, and my nasal patch is just super sensitive to like fibers in the air. Um, Beyond that, I don't have like a good story about how it affected me, but for the people that I've worked with, you know, ultimately it was a super big learning curve for us in terms of not only like, hey, this material makes me feel bad, but also like the nervous system side of things. Whether or not a material may make them feel bad or not is almost besides the point. It's, do they feel like this is going to hurt them? And sometimes that can trigger a nervous system response. And like that's super real. To their body, it's real. And so like the nervous system work, like my ideal client is someone who's already done some of that, like own like personal nervous system work first, because it makes my process so much easier just to really dial in on what their actual needs are. Because if they haven't done that work, it's a lot more challenging, obviously, for both of us, just because like things can be triggering, and just it's harder to kind of dial in on exactly what their needs are.
Yeah. And I love that you say that because I think I say this in every single podcast episode. Our homes are not necessarily the answer to health, but we need them to be void of the things that are going to contribute to poor health. But they need to be safe, but really the safety comes from within. The
Hmm.
safety does not come from the home. The safety ultimately is going to come from within, and that work on ourselves and in our own healing journey has to happen. We can't rely on any external factor to give us that safety. However, at the same exact time, we need to be using materials that aren't going to make us sick and actually cause direct harm. But it's hard and it's a balance, and I think it took me a really long time to come to a place of feeling like that safety really came from within too. Was really searching for that outside of myself for a really long time through my own healing journey. And most of the clients that I have seen who have finally healed, uh, think that's sort of the cycle that happens. They realize, okay, I safety was really within the whole time. And
Hmm.
you're searching, searching, searching for these external safety, and it's not there.
Yeah. And, and I totally agree with you. And kind of touching on the point you were getting at, which is about the building specifically, is yeah, we want to create a building that doesn't make us sick, that doesn't cause harm to us. So we're just trying to control for as many factors as we can so that our building isn't contributing to our sickness or our decline in health. But ultimately, we only have so much control over external forces. It's kind of similar to like if someone says something mean to you, it's like you don't really have control over what other people say to you. You don't always have control over what you breathe or you eat or you drink all the time. And that's also like a learning journey. But we try to control for those things in the build and just make sure that at least our buildings aren't contributing to bad health. And at some times, hopefully, we're increasing things that you're at least breathing and coming into contact with compared to the outside elements outside of your home. So hopefully it's a place where you at least have peace and serenity.
Yeah, absolutely. And one of the things that you guys talk about a lot is that you're healthy, high performance. And I think that when it comes to healthy, high performance and that control, right? With in the high performance world, we talk about the controls and the control layers. And the thing that I love so much about your company is that personally, my take on all of this is that we can work with conventional building materials, but we really have to do so much more controlling of our own when we're working with those materials, whereas natural materials kind of they allow for their own inherent controls in some ways. And so I feel like I really just love that you guys are really into the natural building world. And I would love to just learn more and talk to you more about natural building materials because it's not I've only worked on a couple of projects that have been Faswell projects, and I've tried to dive into some courses and learning, but I haven't been too hands-on on natural build projects. So that's why I was excited to bring you in and just share your experience with that and how do you connect like building science and using natural materials and just yeah, some of your favorite materials you've worked on or worked with,
Yeah,
I should say.
yeah. That's kind of like it's one of my favorite questions, which is kind of like, what is natural building generally?
Yeah.
And it's like such a hard thing to answer, but you're right. Like almost all the time, if you're like, I want to use more natural materials, that usually means most of the time that it's going to be healthier for you, that it's going to be more durable, and that it's going to have more of a buffer for things going wrong. Um, like wood is a great example. Like some people are worried about wood growing mold, and that's totally true. But like also, if you let wood dry out, especially in this climate where things dry out pretty quickly, like wood can get saturated and dry out without growing mold if it dries out quickly enough, right? And like the ability for it to change not only water content, but just also its permeability, its ability to allow moisture to pass through it more quickly. Like that ability is amazing. And so we use like in the high performance world, we use a lot of like tapes and membranes and things like that. And we talk about vapor permeability a lot. We talk about vapor open wall systems. And maybe I'm getting to the weeds here, but like the idea that we want these membranes to be vapor variable so that like if water gets in your wall system, we need it to be able to escape. And so that membrane is going to become more vapor open so that that vapor can escape. Well, like wood does that naturally. Straw does that naturally. Anything clay based does that naturally. And so like nature usually does things better than we do anyways. And so then it's just controlling for like bulk moisture, bulk air, things like that. But to kind of get back, I guess, to your question about like different projects. I love working with straw because it's a local annual crop. You can support a local farmer. It sequesters a bunch of carbon, so that's really big for us, like in terms of like the environmental part of it. Um, it can handle a lot of moisture without growing mold, and as long as you control for bulk moisture, works great. Especially if you pair it with like clay or lime plasters, things like that. Work great for our climate, super insulative. Um, I will say that like when it comes to natural materials, the question of like what is natural building is kind of a bigger piece, and how it meets up with conventional construction is also like a larger conversation. That like what we would consider more of like a true natural build where the house is all straw bale with plaster, or like all adobe, or a cob house, for instance, or light straw clay or something like that. Those are fewer and farther between. And usually those clients are a little bit further away. So usually up in the mountains where land is cheaper. And they're usually like an owner builder type who's trying to kind of do this project on their own so that they can save money and be a part of that process and everything. And that's great. I think for us working in the Front Range, it's a little bit harder for us to be a part of that without just being like a consultant, you know. And that's also fine, and we do offer that to certain people, certain clients. Um, the way that we pair natural materials with conventional construction a lot of times is just switching out, even if we can switch out one for one materials, especially in remodels, because you don't really have as much control over what's existing. And so, like, how far are you going to tear things apart? So can I just like not use spray foam and use cellulose or wood fiber or hemp fiber or denim bats or wool? There's lots of options in the conventional world that you can almost swap out one to one. Um, Even like looking at things like the red list or the declare label, where they list out, here's what's in our product, and you can see whether or not something's going to be toxic to you, or if something's on the red list, maybe just avoid that. And so, like, on a conventional side, that's how we kind of handle those issues for the most part. Um, and then when it comes to the individual client, especially people who come to us with, chemical sensitivities, that's where it's like we have to do a little bit more of like exposure treatment potentially. Like, I'm going to hand you a sample of this. You tell me, can I put this in your house? I might give you lots of options, but like ultimately, I can't tell you whether or not something is going to be good for you. You kind of have to tell me. Um, I know that was a longer answer, but feel free to,
It
do what you want with that.
it was great. That was an awesome answer. I had some actual other questions that came up as you were speaking too, and I was thinking about that. So with straw, for instance, you said if we manage bulk water, so when we're working with materials like straw or any other natural material for the wall assembly, what are some ways that you consider managing bulk water? Is it like with overhangs? Are there do you ever incorporate conventional materials into that somehow, or what's the, mix that you use of conventional versus natural?
Yeah, I mean, any way that we can keep rainwater and groundwater out of our building, like that's the most important thing. We talk about vapor drive a lot, and that is important, and we can get into that. But like first and foremost, it's like when it rains, we need to get that water away from the house. So that's obviously starts with roof overhangs, like you said. We don't always have control over that though. Like sometimes we work with a designer, especially these days where they kind of like these like really tight forms which have no overhangs. And so like you can still make that work. It's just really important you get all your flashing details right. So anywhere you have a penetration, whether it's a pipe or a wire or a window or a door, anytime you're poking into that facade, like you have to be really careful about keeping water out. The other thing is, if water does get in, you have to give it a way to escape. And that's where we get into the vapor open wall assemblies and why we only work with vapor open wall assemblies. Because if you, I mean, if you live on this planet for more than 12 years, probably, you understand that water always gets in somewhere, whether it's through vapor drive or it's like a leak somewhere. Like, there's always a way for water to get in. It's really good at it. And you also need to be able to let it escape. And I think that's where we've had a lot of failures in the past in the building industry, is that we try to, when we try to really like control water, but we do it in a way that like we use plastics and things that do not allow water to pass through at all. So that when water does get behind, it sits there. and it festers and things grow. Um, so so yeah, when we talk about like bulk moisture, it usually comes down to more conventional materials, like some sort of weather resistant barrier, which could be a plaster, but most of the time it's some sort of membrane. We tend to use membranes that are vapor open, um, or vapor variable, so that allows moisture to it keeps bulk moisture out, so water will bead up on it still. But if water gets in, vapor drive can still pull it out. Just like if you were to take a dry brick and drop some water on it, it's going to absorb that water, but it also can dry out. So that kind of general idea.
So are you using those types of membranes with straw?
Sometimes,
Okay.
yeah, especially if we're doing, you know, it kind of depends on the client, right? Or it might depend on your HOA, or it might depend on fire code. So like what your siding or cladding material is, you might have limited options. Um, and so even for straw bale, sometimes we might do a WRB on the outside. We might even sheathe the outside if the engineer tells us we have to. And so at that point, your straw bale is basically just becoming a cellulose insulation. It's the same thing. I mean, it's just like a cellulose based insulation material. So as long as you keep it dry and allow it to water to escape, if it does get in there, you're okay. As long as you're under like 15% moisture content with your wood and your insulation, like you'll probably be fine. You're not going to grow anything. So like again, bulk moisture. So yeah, we might put plywood on the outside and then put a vapor membrane on the outside of that. Like I said, we use vapor variable ones. So like what we try to do is always use materials outside of our insulation that are vapor variable. So, like for instance, we actually don't really ever use OSB for any of our sheathing because OSB is not very vapor variable. It might go from like 2 to a 4 or something in terms of perms. And I know perm rating is kind of a technical term, but just know that like plywood goes from like a 1 to like a 20, 25, something like that. And anything over a 3 is considered vapor open. And the fact that plywood can be vapor variable like that is super important if it ever gets wet. That way it can, or things behind it get wet. That way vapor drive can get out. It's the same thing with our membranes. They can range from, 3 to 70, so depending on if they need to be open, they can. If they need to be closed, they can. And so they pair actually really well. These newer membranes pair really well with natural building, especially when you have to do more of like a conventional stucco or maybe not stucco, but like a conventional cladding if you're doing like metal or wood or something like that. Um, we always do rain screens. We always do dimple mats on our foundations. You're required to do perimeter drain by code, but just anything that can like allow not only moisture to get away, but also give potential for drying. So creating little air gaps, ways for things to escape, like super important. Creates durability for the building too, not just for the occupant, and make the building last a lot longer.
Yeah, and I love that you said that we are here in Colorado, for anybody who's wondering, in a dry climate, and we're still using rain screens and dimple mats. Because
Hmm.
I actually just started working with a client, and the builder, not I shouldn't say the builder, the architect was like, "Oh no, we don't use rain screens here in Colorado." And I'm like, I still think we need to add one. I mean, there's times where it rains for a week or 2 weeks. Know what happens in those times. It's not always dry. So I
Hmm.
love that you guys are doing that. But one quick other thing that came up for me when you were talking about this was the straw and code. I'm curious, can you touch on like, is there any pushback with code and using these different materials or any issues that you've found?
Yeah, I mean, there certainly could be in certain municipalities. Um, the one thing, the one place to start is the IRC, the residential code. And if you go to the appendices of the residential code, there is one for straw bale and there is one for light straw clay. And within those codes, they define all of these terms, whether it's what a bale is, what the moisture content should be, what kind of plaster you should use, different mixes, all that kind of stuff is really already outlined in the code. Now, every municipality doesn't need to adopt an appendices, and typically it takes someone to advocate for that. So if you're in municipality where they haven't adopted the Shred code, usually all it takes is being like, hey, city council or building department, I want you to adopt this appendices. Will you look at it? And most of the time, they'll adopt it if you advocate for it. Having said that, even if you are in a municipality where they haven't adopted the code, you can still reference that appendices to get you through the building department. And that I've never actually had an issue at all. The main things they care about are what is the R value to meet energy code. Beyond that, they don't really care that much. It's mostly just about making sure you're meeting the energy code and you're meeting safety standards. There's also a part of the code, one of the first chapters in the code. I can't remember what the code number is, but it's called basically references alternative building practices. And all it says in there is you can basically do whatever you want as long as you meet the parameters of this code. So, like, as long as you're meeting safety requirements and health or energy requirements, you can build with whatever you want. And so sometimes you have to go through that part of the code and then reference the appendices. But again, like most building departments, at least around here, I can't speak for everyone. I'm sure that there are places you'll get pushback, but like ultimately, all the pieces are there for you to get through code. When it comes to natural building generally, the energy code is sometimes where they get you. So like, let's give a for instance with cob, for instance, or even adobe. Those materials are considered a masonry product, so they're a little different in how we don't really think about R value. They reference it more in terms of U value. So you can actually have like a lower R value for a masonry building, but even then, like they'll probably require you to have insulation somewhere in that assembly. Versus, let's say, hempcrete. They might rate a hempcrete structure at R2 per inch. And so if your building code says you have to have R20, then you have to have a 10-inch wall. And so like those types of things might dictate. Now in Colorado, they're actually, in many municipalities here, we're up to the 2021 energy code. So that might mean that you have to have R25. So then you're, getting a 12-inch wall or whatever. So things like that that might change how your building is going to be built. And just knowing with natural materials too, like the R value per inch might be lower than a foam product. So you might be taking up more space. So like there are different parameters to think about when you're building. And do I have the space? Can I give up interior space? That kind of thing, especially for remodels. It gets a little more challenging.
Yeah, I would imagine that remodels and using some of these materials would be challenging. What are some of the biggest challenges that someone might face if they were wanting to use more natural materials?
Yeah. I mean, it's a good question. Um, a lot of times it just kind of depends on what you have existing, right? So let's say you have a maybe like a 1960s home with a brick facade with a 2x4 stud wall inside of it. Pretty typical for a lot of the developments in Denver and Boulder and things like that, and across the United States as well, especially with westward expansion. Um, it costs a lot of money to tear all that brick down and then to put up new siding. And so, like, you might want to keep your brick exterior, and brick exteriors are super durable. They last a long time. So, like, at that point, you're probably going to try to insulate to the interior. And so that just means losing interior space. And so, like, that's always a challenge. I think the biggest challenge of any construction project is budget, because things cost a lot to build. Um, and there isn't really a great way to get around it unless you're doing all the work yourself. And even then, things are expensive, um, which is like a larger conversation that is unrelated to building about wages and the cost of things. But yeah, those types of challenges are tough. And it just, with a remodel, you have less control, right? What we kind of talked about in terms of being able to kind of control air, control moisture, those types of things. Just you're kind of working with your existing framework, and it's kind of a question of like, how far back do I peel this thing, and how much money do I want to spend doing it to be able to have more control over my whole envelope. And when we talk about like the envelope, we really mean like your water control layer, your insulation, and your air control layer. So like, the outside of your building and kind of tying that whole piece in. So, things like insulating under your slab, like that would be really expensive to do after the fact. So like things like that where you just have to make concessions and kind of figure out like where's the most bang for my buck here. And what is like the lowest hanging fruit to just like improve my home. Um, and those conversations are always a little tricky. I think the most important thing is to spend a lot of time in that pre-construction phase, figuring everything out, putting numbers to it, deciding on the give and take. Pre-construction is just as important as the construction phase.
Gosh, it's so important. That is what I
Hmm.
stress all of the time because it's, you can minimize so much risk when you've kind of gone through everything, planned everything out, and everyone knows what they need to do before you break ground. Once you break ground, you're just, slapping things together, it feels like. You have to have a
Hmm.
plan. It's a big risk to not have a plan. That's also why I always talk about making sure you have a good design team, at least somebody
Hmm.
putting this plan together for you. I think that is very, very helpful. Uh, what about trades? Like you guys probably have really good relationships with different trades who do this work. And I know that, and I want to talk about plaster next and the trades that you have in-house. But for some of these other things, uh, do you think that one of the challenges for people would be finding trades who know how to work with these materials, or what do you think?
Yeah, I mean, it depends, right? So like particularly for remodels, and especially the type of work that we do, you're probably not going to be like most likely, you're probably not going to be like using straw or something to insulate your walls on a remodel, mostly because of spatial constraints. Now, if you had a lot of space and you're able to like wrap your house in straw bales, totally viable. You can do it and be awesome. Um, but like most of the time, you're going to be using some sort of bat insulation or blown in insulation. You're going to be using some membranes, things like that. So like it's mostly just understanding the materiality more than it is like retraining for the most part. Um, and so the biggest thing is coming up, like you said, like finding a good designer or a consultant or a general contractor who's going to like basically be an advocate and educate everyone else on the team about what are the goals for the project and what are the things that we have to do in order to meet those goals. So a big one for us is actually air sealing. And so we haven't really gotten to this yet, but like just like air sealing 101 and like continuous ventilation conversation, we try to make our houses as tight as possible. And now when we talk about that, people get a little concerned about like, am I going to be stuck with this air? Am I going to be stuck with this moisture? And it's like, kind of yes. And so we also introduce mechanical ventilation. So you're always going to have filtered air coming into the house and exiting the house, usually through a energy recovery ventilator or a heat recovery ventilator. Um, so it's just continuously running, pulling filtered air in, exhausting stale air out. Now, the importance of that is that we're controlling where the air is coming in and we're getting rid of the stale air from like the kitchens and bathrooms and stuff. If we don't do that and we just use like exhaust fans, let's say we turn on a kitchen exhaust fan that's exhausting at like 900 cubic feet per minute. If you don't control where that air is going to be coming from, you're creating a vacuum inside your house. So air is leaving, air needs to come in to make up that air. Well, in a older home in particular, that air is going to come in through like cracks around your windows or at your door thresholds or like in your foundation connection, which is like usually the places where you also might have moisture issues or like pest issues or things like that. So you're getting this like potentially moldy, pesty air coming into your building, replacing the air that you're exhausting. So like, anyways, controlling that. So we try to make the houses tight. We use those vapor variable membranes, which still allows moisture to pass through, but we're controlling the air. Now, when you do that, it makes it more difficult on your trades because every penetration that goes through that air barrier has to be sealed up really well. So, like for an electrician, for example, let's say we need to poke through some wires to like an exterior light or an exterior outlet. Every time they poke a wire through, you have to seal that up. Let's say they want to poke two wires through, like you have to make them separate their wires into two separate wires and seal each one up. Because if they try to poke it together, it's really hard to get the seal between both wires. So there's little retraining things like that that can be finicky. But most of the time, as long as you have someone who, most important thing, honestly, is just teaming up with people who are like excited to do something new or to learn something new, who wants to be better than the day they were the day before. Like that type of mentality. Like if you can just find people like that, they're game typically to do that. And it starts from the top down, right? So if you can get the person who's in charge to be on your team, like that'll collect to the rest of the team. Give them incentive if you need to. Bring them some Gatorades,
Yeah.
some burritos, like whatever you
Yeah.
need to do to get them on your team. But like first and foremost, it comes down to your design team or your general contractor to be that advocate and make sure that everything's going to happen properly during the design phase, and then that continues in the construction phase.
Yep. Absolutely. And one of the like people will always ask me, what are the questions? What should I ask? How do I vet to find a good builder? And I think one
Hmm.
of the most important things is finding a builder who is open-minded and just really attentive to detail. It doesn't always matter if they've worked on a healthy project before as much as it matters if they're open-minded, curious, they want to, like you just said, want to be better than they were the day before. And then if you have a consultant on your team or somebody who's advocating for you and your needs and your goals, then they don't necessarily need to be the health conscious person.
No,
Because there's not that many, when we really think about it, I mean, there's really not that many high performance builders out there, green builders out there right now. So, if you're in a place where you don't have access to people with the healthy building knowledge, then at least find somebody who's open minded and curious. And I think that they're going to want to achieve something cool with you and build something great together.
yeah, no doubt. And as a builder, like most builders, their biggest concerns are what is the cost? Because I'm trying to control budget for my client. And then, so, if you're doing something new, it might be harder to like figure out what that cost is going to be. And that's real. The other thing is liability. So like if they're doing something new, like, oh, I don't know, I've never done this before. Like, is this going to work? Is this going to cause problems? But that's also part of that design team being like, hey, here are some resources for you. You know, maybe here are some examples. Maybe it's even like, hey, call this other builder who we've worked with before who's done this, like pick his brain about it, pick her brain about it, whatever. Like giving that builder resources to make them feel more comfortable. And like you said, like as long as there's one person on the team who is going to help be your advocate, then like the project should still be successful as long as everyone's collaborative. You want everyone be able to trust everyone on the team to do what they're going to say or, say what they're going to do. Especially the builder, like it's really easy as a builder to be like, I know they designed it this way, but now that I'm out in the field, I just want to do it this way. And so having someone who's going to come back to the design team and be like, hey, I found this out in the field. What do you want me to do? I kind of want to do this. Someone who's always going to like ask that question ahead of time and not just do whatever they've always done, like that's super critical. So the communication piece is big.
Yes, that's huge. That's such a good tip, and asking those questions too, like sort of like an interview question where it's like, well, how would you handle a situation in the field if it was, it differed from the plan? Like, what would you do? And sort of gauge somebody for what steps they would take in that situation that will help you kind of understand who you're working with. I think it's hard and it's such a deep relationship. Like when you work with a builder, it's like you want to make sure that you connect with them and you have a good relationship because you're together working on something very important for a long period of time. And
And you're
it's
spending like your life savings on it,
exactly.
probably. You're taking out loans. Like, yeah, you want to make sure that it's something you're going to love or at least that's going to last and all that. Yeah, that's super real. And to kind of like expand on that a little more, bringing your builder in early is so helpful. And that can be challenging, because you're trying to vet a builder early on without a lot of experience and you're trying to hire them early because the earlier you can hire them in the pre-construction phase, the more bought in they will be into the design because they're going to have a say in constructability and budget. and they'll be able to vet different options along the way. So if they're bought in, super helpful. And just to like give it a little more advice is we enter into two separate contracts with our clients, and a lot more builders are also doing this now, and I highly recommend it for any client because there's a lot of value here, which is when you find a designer, or maybe you find a builder first and they kind of give you advice on who to hire for designer. But once you hire a designer or a consultant, try to find a builder to come on with a pre-construction agreement. And so that agreement is just for leading, like for design phase up till when you sign a separate construction agreement. And that basically just means that you're just going to hire them as essentially a consultant. If they'll build out the estimate, they can build out the schedule. They'll participate in those meetings talking about constructability and budget and be able to kind of control for those things along the way. That way you don't have many surprises once things start, or you don't get too far down the road design and then the builder comes in and it's just like, well, that's going to blow your budget or something like that. Um, and it also gives you the flexibility to be like, hey, I know we hired you for pre-construction, but I think I'm going to go to a different direction with the build, because you essentially just paying them for their time. So if you want to fire them and hire someone else, like you have that opportunity too. So it's a um, much lower risk contract up front, and it gives you a lot more value.
Yeah, and I really like that because I worked on a project not too long ago where the builder came on early and was providing all this information on pricing, but they didn't have a contract. And I kept telling them I think they probably should sign some sort of agreement up front, and they didn't. And they didn't sign an agreement until it came down to the construction. And it it sort of it almost felt like the relationship between owner and builder at that point was just stressed because they weren't getting paid for that time, or they didn't have any type of agreement up front for helping with that pricing. So they were, not communicating well, and there was some friction. And I think that
Hmm.
that's just a really nice energy exchange to say, hey, let's just agree to work together up until this point, see how it goes, pay for your time, because it does take a ton of time and effort for you guys to go out and source all this information, figure out who's going to be able to supply this, and
Hmm.
provide that guidance on actual constructability,
Hmm.
feasibility of whatever is being designed. So that's a
Hmm.
really good tip.
Yeah. And especially in these times where it's like, it seems like every other day prices are changing, tariffs are a total unknown, so like every time I price something out, I feel like I'm getting a different price. It doesn't always go up, but like most of the time it does. But it does add a ton of value. And so yeah, just like driving that home of super important. And during that pre-construction phase, you're going to get to know each other. You're going to be in relationship together for at least a year, probably if it's a new build. So like working with someone that you can communicate well with and get along with, like that will indicate how the construction is going to go. And then like, you're both kind of bought in at that point. So the builder has incentive to like make that pre-construction phase go well because they want to get the project. And the owner has incentive to use the builder because they've already put in all this work. So like, there is incentive at the end for both of you to enter into construction agreement, but you have time along the way to make changes if you want to or switch it up, go with someone else.
Awesome. Great advice. I absolutely love that. I want to switch gears just a little bit because I know that you guys are like really good at plaster. In fact, I think maybe the wall behind you might be plaster. It looks like a nice, beautiful plaster wall. Oh yeah, look at that.
Yes, quite
I'm
indeed.
a huge fan of plaster. You can find a lot of me using different lime wash paints and things like that just in my own house because I love the look of plaster. And so I wanted to just learn a little bit more about your guys' experience with plaster. Can you first start with sharing a little bit more about that side of your guys' business?
Yeah, so we have a DBA, doing business as, name called Living Plasters. And so Living Plasters, all we do on that side of the business is just plaster. So we do offer both exterior and interior plasters, um, mostly lime, sometimes clay. We don't really offer gypsum, but you could. There are some natural gypsum options. And it is one of those things where, like, first and foremost, it's like beautiful. And it's like, it's really nice to live in a house that's plastered. it's one of those like intangible things that's hard to explain until you experience it. Um, my wife, she tells me at least once a week how much she enjoys having plastered ceilings, which like is not something that she expected or something I expected because like, she likes the plaster and stuff, but it is kind of messy during construction and, it takes time. And so, there's a little pushback there, but now that she's experiencing it all the time, she's like, oh my gosh, the way the light just like cascades into the house, it just brings me joy every day. So there are some intangibles there. Um, and then, beyond that, there are some health benefits, obviously. Like all the plasters we do are all mineral based. So there's no VOCs, there's no plastics, there's no petroleum based anything in these. It's just minerals. Um, and so, they're non-toxic, they're no VOC. And lime and clay kind of have different properties, whether it's helping to control humidity or being antifungal or antimicrobial or those types of things. It's if you accidentally scratch it or if your kid licks it or anything like that, like it's not going to do any damage. So the health part of it is really nice. There's kind of a couple different ways to go about it though. So like if you have a natural build where you're doing straw or cob or adobe or hempcrete or whatever, really easy to plaster on those. They're a great substrate for plaster. And honestly, they like to be plastered because the plaster helps protect that insulation. And also, plaster is a great air barrier and it's a great moisture buffer. So, if moisture ever does get in, it can escape really easily. And plaster really likes to suck that moisture out, loves to do that. So, it pairs really nicely with natural materials. In the conventional space, we actually plaster over drywall all the time. And there's a few different ways to go about that. Um, Now, most of the time, it's just for people who want things to look pretty. We might be working with an interior designer who just really loves the look of plaster. And the client may not really care about any of the health benefits. It might just be that they want something unique and something pretty. And that's fine. And sometimes we just do that where we're just going over a primed drywall. And, we're just a subcontractor. We're not specing the type of drywall they use or the joint compound or the primer, any of that. We're just going over a primed drywall. And that's fine. There are still health benefits to people, occupants inside, but that's not like the driver of that type of project. Um, Now, there are other things you could do to go over. The reason we go over drywall is mostly cost. You could do wood lath or some other sort of substrate that isn't drywall, but it adds a lot of cost because you have to do thicker base coats and things like that. So, for most people, to make it more affordable, we're going over drywall. That's why drywall was invented because it's fast and pretty cheap. Now there are certain drywalls on the market um, that have declare labels that basically have, you know, no toxic fillers or anything like that. So drywall by itself is not inherently bad. And even the paper on drywall, people are worried about mold and things like that, and that's real. But also, if you're controlling the other parts of your house where you're controlling for moisture and air and vapor, then that should never be a problem. So drywall itself is only a problem if the rest of your house isn't built properly. So like on a new build, I don't see paper drywall as an issue ever. Um, as long as you use the right type of drywall. Even for joint compounds, there's like things like Mirko M100, which are hypoallergenic and things like that. Gypsum by itself, there's nothing wrong with it. It's just usually gypsum likes to set up super quick. So you usually have to add in something to keep it from setting up, some sort of retarder. And that's where you start getting into a lot of petroleum-based toxic materials. But you don't need to add toxic things. There are natural minerals that also help that process. So anyways, that's all to say that like you can go over drywall with things that are still fairly natural, and you can use natural or at least healthier primers. Obviously, there are things like, you know, a Benjamin Moore paint, which has no VOC pigments and base paint, still plastic and petroleum based. You could go with like their Natura line, or you could go with a mineral primer. And there are lots of options there. They tend to be more expensive because you're paying for shipping costs because they're not stocked locally. And that's like a big gap actually that I see in the market right now is mineral based paints not being cost competitive. So like, anyways, that's all to say that like you can pretty much plaster over anything. Just depends on your substrate. We'll help you figure out if it makes sense for you if you want that. But plaster is just really nice to experience, as you know, like even just being surrounded by natural materials just feels good, when there's wood around you, stone, it just feels nice.
It I was talking about this recently. There's just this energy to it that you can't, like you said, the intangible things. There's just this energetic feel to it where you feel happier, you feel better. Maybe it's the negative ions. I don't know. I don't know how to measure those. They say that the plaster emits negative ions. I don't know how we test that. So if anyone hears this and they know how to test that, I would love to know. But it's just it just feels so good and like comfortable and warm and
Hmm.
welcoming. Will you just kind of explain like the differences between clay and lime plaster and when someone might use one or the other for those who don't know?
Yeah, I mean, ultimately we classify plaster based on the glue that's holding it together and what we call the binder. And so for a clay plaster, the clay is the sticky thing that's holding everything else together. For a lime plaster, the lime is the sticky thing that's holding everything together. That's true for gypsum or for cement. So cement stucco or a joint compound, those are plasters. Um, it's just what their base is. We typically offer clay and lime because we feel like they're first and foremost like the most beautiful, but also tend to be the most healthy. Clay is really nice if you want to help with moisture buffering. So in bathrooms, things like that, like it can absorb a ton of moisture and wants to hold on to that moisture, loves it. Clay is also like really low embodied energy typically because you're basically just digging up the clay, adding some sand to it, maybe some iron oxide pigments or something, and you're putting it on the wall. So like the amount of energy it takes to do that is pretty low. Clay is also very vapor open and vapor variable. So like if you're looking for a vapor open wall assembly, like clay works great. Super vapor open, can control your humidity and your vapor drive super good. It's amazing. The downfall of clay is that it's pretty soft. So like if you have an interior clay plaster, it can get dinged up pretty easily. Also, it doesn't really work good in like bulk moisture areas. So probably not behind the backsplash of your bathroom sink. Definitely not inside your shower because it can rehydrate and then it could potentially melt off your wall. The nice thing about clay is that it's pretty easy to repair. You could literally scrape that plaster up off the ground and like put it back on there. Whether or not it looks good is like the big question. Um, but like clay is great for most cases. The the reason why a lot of my clients end up going to lime is strictly for durability. Even for like exteriors, clay in our climate, people think we live in a dry climate, but like we get driving rain, big thunderstorms, a lot of snow melt. And so unless you have really big overhangs and you're kind of high off the ground, like clay exteriors are tricky. We have done it, and in some cases it's worked out fine, but like most of the time, lime is probably your best bet for exteriors. On the interior, you can go either way. Lime is just a lot more durable. It doesn't really care about getting wet, even with bulk moisture. It won't melt off the wall. Essentially, when you put lime on the wall, it turns back into a stone. You have limestone on your walls. You have marble walls, essentially. So pretty durable. Um, they don't scratch as easily or chip as easily. They're easier to clean and to wash off, especially with kids around. Um, Even like light sanding, if like, your kid brings like a Sharpie on the wall or something, like things like that, it's easier to kind of sand things off and get things to look nicer. So it's just easier to maintain. It still has some moisture buffering properties, just not as good as lime, or not as good as clay. Still has vapor open qualities, just not as good as clay. It is higher embodied energy, but again, it's just all mineral based. So like health wise, they're both great. Lime is a little bit more antifungal and antimicrobial than clay would be. But again, like both these materials work great for interior healthy spaces. You can't really go wrong. Just kind of depends on, how much maintenance and durability you want.
Yeah. That's a great example. And one thing that I think is a growing trend is using lime plaster in our showers. So, can you talk a little bit about how people might use that and what that technique is?
Yeah, I mean, the most common technique that people reference for lime plaster in showers is called Tadilact. And it's a Moroccan technique that's been around for a long time, thousands of years. And essentially, it's a lime plaster that's polished, um, compressed, and once it kind of gets to that stage where everything's like really compressed and shiny and nice, you hit it with an olive oil based soap. But we're still talking a soap, not an oil. And the soap, when it reacts with the calcium hydroxide, which is the lime, it turns into calcium stearate, which is a natural wax. So you're kind of embedding this natural wax layer into the surface of your plaster. Tadalact itself is kind of a technique of lime plaster. There are other lime plasters around the world that have been used similarly for waterproof areas. Um, I think the most important thing to know is when it comes to durability of putting plaster in showers is that, you know, it's still it's still marble. So if you've ever had experienced a marble countertop, they're still, even when you seal them, they're still a little bit porous. They can still stain with oils and acids and things like that. So like we tend to almost like talk someone out of it. Um, and then if they still want it, then we do it. Just because I want to make sure it's the right client who cares about it and is going to want to maintain it. Because it does require maintenance if you want to keep it nice. So we do it. I don't typically do it on horizontal surfaces, especially floors. Um, if you wanted to add like an acrylic fortifier to it, it would make it more durable. But then you're kind of getting away from the natural part of things, introducing acrylic. So, you know, the other big thing just to kind of mention is micro cement. That's pretty big right now, especially like on the social media area. Micro cement's fine. Essentially, it's a acrylic modified cement plaster, and it works great. It is more durable than the lime. It's not quite as pretty, and obviously, there's a lot of acrylic in it. So depending on whether or not that works for you, but the nice thing about it is that there are no grout lines. It's beautiful and uniform. It does kind of age over time. Um, and I have one and it's great.
What did you do in your shower?
Yeah. I
Okay.
mean, I also have it like kind of, we do also like a dry use version that I do in a lot of bathrooms. So, sometimes we'll do the wet use version inside the shower, which really just means that we have to prepare it a little bit. It's a little more preparation for the substrate, like the base coat layers. And then the finishing of it, we get really perfect. Versus the dry use, it looks the same as the stuff inside the shower, but we're not getting like same amount of perfection because you don't want to pay for us to do that in a non-wet use area. So we might do that on the ceiling and the walls outside the shower and stuff like that if you kind of want that uniform look. And so, yeah, I have Tadalact. I have Tadalact in my backsplash in my kitchen. I've Tadalact on the walls of both my bathrooms, all three of my bathrooms, but only in one shower.
When are you doing a house tour?
Yeah, yeah. I mean, we could. I have basically a tri-level from 1971. So like there's only so much you can do, but when you have a plaster business where you have leftover buckets of stuff all the time, like
Yes.
you usually put them to use, especially before you have kids.
Oh my gosh, amazing. I love that. Yeah, the micro cement, that's been coming up a lot. And obviously
Hmm.
from my point of view, I'm always like, okay, well, is there any reason to believe this would not be safe? And there's like some studies out there that talk about like the nanoparticles and things like that. It seems to me like once it's installed, it's probably not an issue, but it's more so if it gets dinged or if it gets scratched or during the construction that there might be some exposure to these nanoparticles. Have you looked into that at all or have any experience with the nanoparticles with micro cement?
I haven't. I would say that the only things I could probably compare that to is just cement itself is not necessarily bad for you. It does contain silica, so like, silicosis is real, but that's more of an extended exposure. A little bit of exposure to like some scratches off the wall, that's not a big deal. There are potentially heavy metals in some cement products. So like that's something also to consider. But again, once it's cured, not a big deal until demo time. Um, the acrylic fortifiers and the sealers, that's like a different story. So like I guess one thing I compare it to is I was looking into like LVP flooring, which is also really big right now, which, is vinyl. Um, and I was just, I was looking into the off-gassing potential of that. because I was just kind of curious. I don't like to use it because I don't like to use vinyl generally, but I was just curious. And it was interesting, like the studies they've done, and I know it hasn't been around that long, but like the off-gassing potential isn't as big as I thought it was, at least based on the studies that they've done. But the big one is over time, as it gets worn, those microplastics get in the air. And so as the surface wears down, all of a sudden you're breathing in a ton of stuff, both micro particles as well as just like those gases that are being released again. So like it might be similar to that, but I'm not positive.
Yeah, I mean, that would probably be like the SVOCs breaking down from the product. And even when something says Green Guard Gold, doesn't mean that it's a healthy material. That's, I think, a big common misconception, especially in like the LVT, LVP, products. And you can't recycle them. So, and they scratch so easily. So it's like once they look like crap and you get rid of them, then they're just going to go into a landfill and then they're going to create more microplastics in our environment. So you might not be directly impacted right away, but yeah, I wish we weren't using so much LVP, but it's inexpensive and everything's so expensive. So I understand why people, choose it, but
I totally get it. Yeah. I was at a conference recently. There was a natural building conference up in Bozeman, and one of the presenters, she had what she called the building materials pyramid, which is kind of like the old food pyramid. And, at the very top, she had things like plastics. And it was like, there may be a place for these, but we're going to try to reduce them as much as possible. But down here are all the like natural materials, like use a bunch of this stuff down here, maybe a little bit here and there, maybe less of this, and then, things at the top. And I loved that concept of just reminding ourselves that like there may be a place for certain things, but let's try to reduce that as much as possible. Yeah, and it is challenging because there's a reason why, when we look at home prices, people can build for cheaper, but almost always you're getting cheaper materials, a building that's not as durable, and materials that are most likely more toxic. And so again, I get it, but like we're putting vulnerable people into a more vulnerable situation, and including like especially the most vulnerable in our population, which are young children, pregnant women, older people, or people who are immunocompromised. Like those are the people who are going to be affected the most. Um, and so like I don't know, it's a challenging one. I will say that there are lots of products on the market now, and we're getting more and more that are more of the conventional space. So when it comes to things like LVP, there is cork, there's marmoleum, there's hemp wood, there's bamboo, even different engineered floorings. There are options. None of them are as cheap as LVP, but they are better. So, you
yeah.
know,
And where's your cost? Like,
yeah, that's another thing. Like, I know we haven't talked about cost much, but like if you, especially on a new build, like the best way to reduce cost is to reduce the size ultimately. Um, and that's challenging, especially when you have a family and you need some breakout space. I get that. Uh, but trying to come up with a design that's more compact, that's simpler form, something that, you can be creative with the spaces within them to at least try to give them multiple uses. That's probably your best bet. If you want something healthy and you're trying to do it on as tight a budget as possible, like just as much as you can, think about how can I make this space smaller and make the form simpler.
yeah, I know. I think we've gotten so like numb, not even numb. I don't know, just we've just come to expect these huge houses and we don't really need that space, and we have to maintain our homes once we build them too, and it's so hard that we have to bring extra help in to even help us to maintain the house and clean the house. Like even us, we're in, I think our house is about, I don't know, 1,300 to maybe 1,500 square feet, so pretty small compared to a lot of homes. And even I find this like really hard to maintain at the level of which I know it needs to be maintained from a health perspective. So I'm always trying to encourage people to build smaller, and just again, why the design team is so great. Having a good design team who can get creative and like, how can we actually achieve all the goals you're looking for with your space and more, but not
Hmm.
having to create extra rooms just because we needed to throw a room in for this or that, or I don't know. I think that's such a good point.
Yeah, and it's really tough because I get it. It's like, well, I want to be able to host these people when they come in from out of town. It's like I appreciate that, and like also, how often does that happen? Once a year, twice a year? Like, are we building this extra room for the what if? Um, that's tough. But also, a lot of people work from home now, and having a dedicated home office is like really important. Um, and that's real too. So like, you know, to your point, having a good designer who's like in line with your values and your goals, but also understands. You also have a GC who's also trying to rein in that budget, and teaming those two things up to create something that's going to work for you, and that's going to be healthy, and it's going to be like a space that inspires you. Like that's where you want to be.
Yeah, absolutely. Oh my gosh, I feel like we could go for like 2 hours. I would love to have you back on because I have so many other questions, but to sort of keep this at a manageable time,
Sure.
I would love to just kind of close us by asking a little more of a personal question, just of I always like to end with a personal insight. And I'd just love to know, like, with your time doing this work and, you know, moving through the natural building world, has this given you, I don't know, some sort of deeper understanding of your environment or shaped the way that you live or you view the world? Is there anything you can share to leave us with, like a just for people to grow a little bit and learn from your growth?
Yeah, it's definitely been a journey. Um, it's definitely been one of those things where, the more you learn, the more you realize that you don't know, but you're also so excited to learn more. I think there's like the Dunning-Kruger effect where you start to know things and you think you know a lot, and then the more you learn, more you realize you don't know, and you kind of like come back down into this like, oh no, I don't know anything. Like your mind starts getting blown, and then you start, you know, you kind of keep that perspective and just continue to grow from there and start to learn more and try to be a little bit more humble about what you don't know because it's impossible to know everything right now, and like there are, things that ancient people have known, and then there's science, and those things are coming together, but we can only measure with how good of the tools we have to do it. So like, just try to learn more, use your intuition, um, just like don't get downtrodden by the naysayers because there's a lot of them. And the industry is moving in the direction we want it to right now. Like there's clear evidence of that, and it's definitely consumer driven as well. People are more concerned about health. And so like let's just like keep this momentum going in the right direction, and there'll be more options in the market. There'll be more builders and designers who are designing for it. And that's what, people who want to learn and grow, that's what they want to do. We all want to like be better than we were the day before. And so like just try to surround yourself with those types of people, build a team with those types of people, and like we'll do our best and hopefully, build good things.
Yeah. Ah, I love that. And oh my gosh, that couldn't be more true. Just you think you have gotten to this place where you know so much, and then all of a sudden you're like, the more you know, the more you realize you don't know. And you're just like, okay, it is okay for us to seek support from other
Hmm.
people and ask questions. And like, there's never a stupid question. I always tell people, like, there's never a stupid question. Just ask, because I ask questions all the time. There's so many things, and you just don't know what you don't know. So that was awesome. Thank
And if we have to bring in someone who specializes in that, great. Like the
you. That,
power of specialized consultants, they bring a lot of value. So like find the people who know and utilize them. Lean on your team.
yes. And that's like
Hmm.
just having a good team, lean on your team, find a good team, and teamwork really does make the dream work.
Oh yeah, it's all about the collaboration.
Exactly. I love it. Well, thank you so much for joining me today and sharing your wisdom. I hope that we can do another one sometime soon and chat more. But thanks again, Frank. I appreciate you.
I would be happy to come back anytime. Appreciate you having me, and yeah, hopefully we'll work together in the future.
Awesome. Thanks, Frank.
All right, thank you.
Thanks so much for tuning in to the Awakening Spaces podcast. If you're ready to take what you've learned and start applying it to your own home, then there's a few ways that we can support you. On our website, you can find a collection of free and paid guides and courses that will walk you through everything from designing a healthy home to choosing safe materials and reducing mold, chemical, and EMF exposure. And if you're looking for more personalized guidance, then we also offer one-on-one consulting and design support, where we act as your owner's representative to help you plan, manage, and execute your new build or renovation project with confidence. You can explore all of these offerings on our website at awakeningspaces.com. And if this podcast has helped you in any way, we would be so incredibly grateful if you would like, subscribe, and share this podcast so that it can reach more people. Until next time, thank you so much for listening and being here and stepping into what it means to be an awakened homeowner.